Through the spotting scope, Daniel could see 3 animals at the den entrance. One polar bear cub, 4 months old, the male he'd been logging since October. And beside him, pressed against the mother's flank, 2 husky puppies. He pulled back from the scope, looked at the coordinates on his GPS, looked back through the lens. The puppies were still there. A polar bear does not adopt dogs. This is not a behavioral gray area. It is not something that happens in the literature. In the field, reports. In 40 years of documented observation on this island, a polar bear encountering a dog in the wild does not register it as something to protect. The categories are clear prey, threat, or irrelevant. What he was seeing fit none of those categories. He reached for the radio. Ross, come up to the ridge. Bring the long lens. Wrangel Island sat in the Chukchi Sea off the northeastern coast of Russia, a UNESCO World Heritage Site and one of the highest density polar bear habitats on the planet, staffed year-round by a skeleton crew of researchers. In winter, that crew was reduced to 2, Daniel and his field technician, Ross. Supply runs were seasonal. The satellite uplink worked in good weather. Everything that happened on Wrangel in winter happened without much in the way of backup. Ross arrived at the ridge 11 minutes later and looked through the long lens without speaking for a full 30 seconds. "Those are dogs," he said. "Yes. She has dogs. 2 of them. Puppies. 8 weeks old. Maybe 10. Ross looked up from the lens. How? Daniel had been working on that question for 20 minutes. A geological survey team had passed through the island's eastern sector 3 weeks ago, the last human presence before the winter lockdown. They had reported, in their routine debrief, losing 2 sled dogs during a blizzard on their second night. The dogs had not been found. The team had moved on. The blizzard had been on the 14th. Mara, the designation they used for F7, the name that had attached itself without anyone officially proposing it, had lost one of her original 2 cubs on the 17th. 3 days of hard weather, a female bear in the acute physiological state of early cub loss, her maternal drive elevated, and suddenly, without a full outlet. The puppies had been somewhere in the dark, calling. She found them, Daniel said. Or they found her. One or the other. Ross looked back through the lens. The 2 puppies were pressed against Mara's side in the specific configuration that young animals adopted when warmth was the primary requirement. The polar bear cub was investigating one of them with his nose patient. Unhurried. Mara had her head down, eyes forward, watching the landscape with the alert stillness of a bear that had something to protect. "What do we do?" Ross asked. Daniel was quiet for a moment, watching. "We document it," he said. For the next 6 weeks, the observation ridge became the most occupied location on the island. Mara treated the puppies with the same behavioral repertoire she applied to her cub, the grooming, the physical correction when they strayed too far, the body positioning that shielded all 3 from wind. She nursed them, though the milk composition was wrong for canines. She did not seem to notice or care. She fed them from her own kills, tearing small portions that the puppies consumed with the enthusiasm of animals that had learned early that food was not guaranteed. The cub Wrangel, F7, C1, whom Ross had taken to calling Kodiak in the field, notes, in a way that was unprofessional and also accurate, adapted to the situation with the apparent equanimity of a young animal for whom the composition of his immediate family was simply, whatever it was, He wrestled with the puppies in the snow, a size mismatch that should have been dangerous and wasn't. He slept against them. He investigated their ears, their tails, their paws, with the focused curiosity he brought to everything. The puppies designated in the official records as Wrangel Canine 01 and -02, and in Ross's notes as Frost and Atlas grew visibly week by week. Their alarm vocalizations shifted register over time, not quieter, but different, carrying a pitch and pattern more consistent with bear cub distress calls than with standard canine warning sounds. Daniel noted this in the records and did not attempt to explain it. In field work, the most important discipline was knowing which questions the data could answer and which it couldn't. The wolves appeared in late February. Wrangel Island had a resident wolf population small, opportunistic. Their winter behavior shaped by the same prey scarcity that pushed every predator on the island into decisions it would not make in better conditions. A pack of 5 had been logged on the northern transect 2 weeks earlier, moving south. Daniel had noted it as routine. It was a Tuesday morning, overcast, visibility reduced by ground drift, when the pack found Mara's denning area. Daniel and Ross were at the ridge. They saw the wolves arrive from the east in the loose formation of animals following a scent with purpose. They saw Mara emerge from the den before the wolves were within 200 meters and positioned herself between the pack and the entrance. The standoff that followed lasted 40 minutes. Mara held her ground, with the economy of a bear conserving energy she could not afford to spend carelessly. 6 weeks of nursing 3 youngsters had cost her. And it showed. The wolves knew this, or knew something that functioned like knowing it. And they worked the standoff, the way experienced predators worked an advantage patient. Distributed. Waiting. The gap between what she could do and what they needed to do narrowed. Ross, watching beside him, said quietly, "She's tiring." Daniel did not disagree. What happened next was not something either of them could have predicted, and was not something Daniel would describe in the field report as anything other than what it functionally was: 2 dogs responding to a threat in the manner of dogs. Frost and Atlas came out of the den. They were 6 months old and not small anymore, but not large either, and under any normal assessment, they should have retreated or hidden. Instead, they came out at a run and started barking, not the tentative vocalization of young dogs, uncertain of a situation, but the full, sustained alarm bark of animals that had made a definitive assessment and were communicating it at volume. The sound was wrong. Not wrong in quality, they were barking, unambiguously, in the way dogs barked. But the acoustic environment of Wrangel Island in February was near total silence, interrupted by wind. The sudden introduction of sustained canine alarm calls from a direction the wolves had not anticipated created a disruption in the pack's spatial orientation that was visible even at 2 kilometers through a spotting scope. 2 wolves turned toward the sound. The formation broke. Kodiak came out behind the dogs and added his own contribution, the high roar of a bear cub that was not yet large but was not quiet, and the disruption compounded. Mara moved. The pack's moment of hesitation gave her the fraction she needed. She covered the distance to the nearest wolf before Daniel had registered she was moving. And after that, the cost-benefit calculation, the pack had been running for 40 minutes, resolved in one direction. They left. Ross lowered his binoculars. After a moment, he said, "Did the dogs just yes?" Daniel said, "Is that in any literature you've read?" "No." He wrote it down anyway. The decision to supplement Mara's food supply was not made quickly. There were standard arguments against intervention arrived at through decades of hard experience, with the costs of habituating wild animals to human provisioning. Daniel knew them and believed most of them. He looked at Mara's body condition assessments from the past 6 weeks and made the decision that the situation was no longer within the parameters those arguments had been designed for. They assumed a bear raising 1 cub in normal conditions. These were not normal conditions. He and Ross began leaving fish at the designated provisioning site 200 meters from the den intervals, calibrated to offset the caloric deficit without creating dependency. Every placement and consumption logged in the records. Mara found the first cache within 4 hours. She ate without apparent concern about the source. That was the correct association for her to have. Over the following weeks, her condition stabilized. Spring arrived incrementally, not a sudden shift, but a gradual increase in light that the island's inhabitants registered before the temperature confirmed it. The sea ice changed. The food supply changed. The winter's calculus of survival rearranged itself into spring. On the last morning before Daniel's rotation ended, he and Ross went to the ridge one final time. Mara had been moving northward for 2 days, the seasonal behavior that took bears toward the coast as the ice reconfigured. She was in good condition. Her gait was the deliberate walk of an animal that knew where it was going and had the reserves to get there. Kodiak followed, larger now than he had been in October, moving with the beginning of the authority that young bears developed as their size crossed certain thresholds. Frost and Atlas walked beside him. They were not polar bears. They were not sled dogs. They were something the categories available did not quite fit, carrying behavioral patterns that Daniel had notes on and not yet conclusions about. They moved north with their family in the flat gray morning light, 4 figures on the white ground, decreasing in size as the distance increased. At the crest of the far ridge, Mara stopped. She turned and looked back toward the station, toward the ridge where the scope was set up, where Daniel and Ross had spent 6 weeks of winter mornings. She held the look for a moment. Then she turned north and walked over the ridge, and the 4 of them dropped below the line of the horizon, and the tundra was empty and white, and exactly what it had been before any of this started. Ross capped his lens. "That's not in any field guide," he said. Daniel was already writing. Wrangel Island is not a place most people will ever see. It sits 200 kilometers off the northeastern coast of Russia in the Chukchi Sea, locked in ice for most of the year, accessible for a few months in summer and largely unreachable in winter. What makes it significant is not its remoteness, but its function. It is the primary denning site for the Chukchi Sea polar bear population, the single largest gathering of denning polar bears in the world, and the reason researchers like Daniel choose to spend winters there in skeleton crews of 2. The most recent population count conducted on Wrangel Island recorded 864 individual polar bears, more than 1/3 of the entire Chukchi Alaska subpopulation. By global standards, the Chukchi Sea population is one of the better documented success stories in polar bear conservation research. Conducted between 2008 and 2017, found that bears in this population maintained good body condition and reproductive success despite ongoing sea ice loss, likely due to the high biological productivity of the region. But the operative word in that finding is maintained. Even populations like the Chukchi Sea, where bears appear to have done well in recent years, will eventually become stressed and decline as sea ice loss continues. Starting in the late 2010s, the spring sea ice west of Alaska became much thinner and in some areas began melting completely by May, a change significant enough to make the helicopter-based research that had been running for a decade too dangerous to continue. The research adapted. The ice did not. Across the Arctic, polar bears are experiencing the impacts of climate change differently. In some high Arctic regions, melting of thick multi-year sea ice has temporarily created more prey access, leading to stable or even improved conditions for certain subpopulations. In other parts of the Arctic, particularly the southern Beaufort Sea, western Hudson Bay, and southern Hudson Bay sea ice is shrinking faster than bears can adapt, and populations are declining. The October 2024 assessment from the IUCN Polar Bear Specialist Group confirmed this uneven picture, and its underlying direction, the variation, is regional and temporary. The trend is not. What happens on Wrangel Island matters beyond Wrangel Island. Researchers have noted that the island may serve as a sanctuary for polar bears as the Arctic continues to warm, as it once served as a final refuge for woolly mammoths and other Pleistocene species during earlier periods of environmental change. Whether it can fulfill that role depends on whether the conditions that make it viable, stable denning habitat, reliable sea ice within reach, sufficient prey persist long enough to matter. The research that produces these numbers, the population surveys, the body condition assessments, the behavioral studies that document what is actually changing and at what rate is what we know. And knowing accurately is the precondition for doing anything useful. Polar Bears International funds this field work directly, including the American-Russian research program on Wrangel Island that has been running since 2016. If this story stayed with you, their work is the most direct place that support lands. The link is in the description below. And if you work in Arctic research, in wildlife monitoring, in any of the sciences that produce the data that Daniel's reports become part of the work matters, not because any single observation changes the outcome, but because the accumulation of accurate observation over time is the only foundation that allows anyone to understand what is happening and make decisions accordingly. Daniel's notes on Mara and Frost and Atlas went into a file. That file went into a database. Somewhere in that database is the beginning of an understanding that did not exist before one winter on Wrangel Island produced something that was not in any field guide.